Between 1971 and 2017, one address in Los Angeles became the most photographed private residence in America, 5526 Charing Cross Road, the Playboy Mansion. Over 46 years, more than 2,000 parties were held inside those gates. An estimated 10,000 women passed through its doors. The mansion appeared in 127 magazine covers. It generated roughly $50 million per year in media value at its peak. That's equivalent to $89 million annually in today's money. The property hosted presidents, celebrities, and business moguls. Fortune 500 executives attended parties there. Hollywood A-listers were regular guests. The mansion was featured in 83 films and television shows. To the public, it was paradise. But here's what the cameras didn't show. At least 15 former residents have now come forward with allegations of control, manipulation, and abuse. Several described hidden surveillance systems. Multiple women reported pressure to participate in activities they didn't consent to. Former staff members confirmed the presence of recording equipment throughout the property. And here's what no one's talking about. The mansion wasn't just a house. It was a controlled environment designed to maintain power over the women who lived there. The parties you saw? Staged. The smiles? Often forced. The glamour? A carefully constructed illusion hiding something much darker. I'm going to show you the real story behind America's most controversial mansion. We'll look at testimonies from former girlfriends. We'll examine the control mechanisms. We'll analyze the allegations that dozens of women have made under oath and on camera. We'll follow the money trail that enabled everything. We'll investigate the institutional structures that protected this system. We'll examine why it took nearly 50 years for the truth to emerge. If you're ready to see what really happened behind those gates, let's begin. The Playboy Mansion was purchased in 1971 for $1.1 million. That's $8.3 million in today's money. The property spans 5.3 acres in Holmby Hills, one of Los Angeles's most exclusive neighborhoods. The main residence contains 29 rooms across 20,000 square feet. The grounds include a zoo with peacocks and monkeys, a grotto with a pool, a wine cellar holding 3,000 bottles, and a game house. The mansion sits next to properties owned by some of America's wealthiest families. The neighborhood includes estates valued at $50 million to $200 million. At its peak valuation in 2016, the property was listed for $200 million. Hugh Hefner spent $500,000 renovating the mansion when he first purchased it. That's $3.8 million in today's money. He added the famous grotto. He built the zoo enclosures. He installed a screening room with 50 seats. But here's the part nobody talks about. After those initial renovations, almost nothing was updated for 45 years. Former girlfriend Holly Madison lived there from 2001 to 2008. 7 years. She described the mansion in her memoir as a prison. She said the decor hadn't been updated since the 1980s. The carpets were stained and worn. The bedrooms smelled of mold and mildew. Crystal Hefner, Hugh's widow, confirmed these details in 2022. She revealed that black mold covered entire sections of the mansion. The plumbing failed regularly. The electrical system was outdated and dangerous. The infrastructure was crumbling. Health inspectors were never allowed inside. Building code enforcement was somehow avoided for decades. So why didn't Hefner renovate? He died with $43 million in assets. That's $50 million in today's money. He had the resources to maintain the property. But the Decay served a purpose. It kept the women dependent. They couldn't invite outsiders. They couldn't show friends their living conditions. They couldn't have family visit and stay overnight. The mansion became their entire world. Nothing came in. Nothing went out. Isolation is the first step in control. Former staff member Jonathan Dante worked at the mansion for 11 years. He confirmed that maintenance was deliberately minimal. He said Hefner refused to allow contractors extensive access to the property. Why? Because contractors would see what was really happening. They would witness the dynamics. They might talk. The decay wasn't neglect. It was strategic isolation. Now, let's look at how the control system actually worked. Every woman who lived in the mansion had to follow a strict set of rules. These weren't suggestions. They were requirements enforced through immediate consequences. Rule 1, a 9 p.m. curfew every single night. If you missed curfew, you were evicted immediately. Your belongings would be packed and waiting at the gate. Former girlfriend Kendra Wilkinson confirmed this in multiple interviews. She said one girl came home at 9:02 p.m. Her room was cleared by 9:30 p.m. Her belongings were in boxes by the front gate. Security escorted her off the property. 9 o'clock, 2 minutes late. Gone. This created constant anxiety. The women had to plan their entire lives around this curfew. They couldn't take evening classes. They couldn't work normal jobs. They couldn't spontaneously spend time with friends. Their lives revolved around the mansion's schedule. Rule 2, no outside jobs allowed. The women received a $1,000 weekly allowance. That's roughly $1,450 in today's money. In Los Angeles, one of America's most expensive cities. For context, average rent in Los Angeles in 2005 was $1,200 per month. The allowance covered rent and little else. But the women lived at the mansion. They didn't pay rent. So what was the allowance for? Appearance, maintenance. Hair appointments cost $200 to $400. Nail appointments cost $80 to $120. Tanning sessions cost $50 to $100. The women were expected to maintain these appointments weekly. Former girlfriend Isabella St. James wrote that she spent her entire allowance on appearance maintenance. She said there was nothing left for savings, nothing for building an independent life. They couldn't save. They couldn't build careers. They couldn't create financial independence. Rule 3, no male visitors. Ever. Fathers, brothers, and male friends were prohibited from entering the property. This severed family connections. It isolated the women from outside support systems and outside perspectives. Holly Madison wrote that her father was never allowed to visit. She had to meet him off-property if she wanted to see him before curfew. But female friends could visit only with advance approval. They had to be cleared by security. They had to sign non-disclosure agreements before entering. This meant the women couldn't casually invite friends over. Every social interaction required permission and formal documentation. Rule 4, dress code requirements at all times. The women had to wear specific clothing when in public areas of the mansion. Hefner had preferences, all white outfits for certain events, matching pajamas for movie nights, specific styles and brands. Former residents described feeling like they were in uniform, like they were employees rather than girlfriends. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was Rule 5, mandatory attendance at movie nights twice per week. Former residents described these nights in chilling detail. The women had to gather in Hefner's bedroom at 9 p.m. They had to watch pornography that Hefner selected. They were expected to participate in group sexual activities afterward. Holly Madison said she felt immense pressure to attend. She described feeling physically sick before these nights. She said many women drank heavily beforehand to cope. Kendra Wilkinson called it like a job you had to do. She said the atmosphere was mechanical and performative. Former girlfriend Isabella St. James wrote that refusal meant losing your room, your allowance, and your status. She said new arrivals were warned. If you don't participate, you won't last here. 8 different women have now confirmed this pattern. Same details, same pressure, same consequences. Here's the kicker. Attendance records were kept. Hefner's assistants tracked who came to these gatherings. They maintained spreadsheets. Women who missed too many were labeled difficult and eventually removed. Former Executive Secretary Mickey Garcia confirmed that these records existed. She said she was instructed to maintain them. She said the information was used to evaluate which women would be kept in the house. This wasn't a mansion. This was a controlled environment masquerading as luxury. Rule 6, no discussing mansion activities with outsiders. Every woman signed a non-disclosure agreement, but beyond the legal document, there was social pressure and direct intimidation. Former residents described being explicitly told, what happens here stays here. They were warned that discussing mansion life would result in immediate eviction and potential legal action. Multiple women have stated that they were shown photographs or footage of themselves as a warning. The message was clear. We have evidence. Stay silent. This rule ensured that even women who left couldn't easily speak about what happened. The threat of legal consequences and public release of private footage kept them quiet for years. In 2022, former Playmate P.J. Maston made a shocking allegation. She claimed that hidden cameras were installed throughout the mansion, in bedrooms, in bathrooms, in the grotto, in the game room. She said Hugh Hefner kept recordings of intimate encounters, thousands of hours of footage, stored in a secure location that only he and his closest associates could access. At first, people dismissed this as conspiracy theory. But then more women came forward with specific details about specific locations, about specific incidents. Former girlfriend Sandra Theodore confirmed the presence of recording equipment in Hefner's bedroom. She appeared in the A&E documentary Secrets of Playboy and described cameras hidden behind two-way mirrors. She said she discovered them accidentally. She said when she confronted Hefner, he didn't deny their existence. He told her they were for security. Security cameras in the bedroom. Think about what that means. Stefan Tettenbaum, Hefner's former valet from 1978 to 1981, corroborated these claims. He said security cameras covered every corner of the property. He confirmed that footage was reviewed daily by Hefner and select staff members. He described a control room with monitors. He said Hefner would watch footage of the grounds, the pool area, and common spaces. He said the recordings were archived. Former staff member Mark Ebner investigated the surveillance system extensively. He interviewed multiple former employees who confirmed its existence. He obtained architectural plans that showed wiring consistent with extensive camera installation. Here's where it gets darker. Multiple women alleged that these recordings were used as leverage. They claimed Hefner would threaten to release footage if they spoke publicly about mansion life, or if they tried to leave permanently, or if they refused to participate in activities. Former Playmate Mickey Garcia, who worked as Hefner's executive secretary for 6 years, stated in interviews that she witnessed this intimidation tactic firsthand. She said at least 12 women were shown footage of themselves and warned against betraying the Playboy family. She described one incident in detail. A woman who had left the mansion threatened to speak to a tabloid about her experiences. She was invited back for a meeting. She was shown footage of intimate encounters. She was told the footage would be released if she spoke publicly. The woman stayed silent for 25 years. Former girlfriend Carla Howe made similar allegations in 2022. She claimed that Hefner told her directly that he recorded everything. She said he framed it as protection. If anyone ever lies about what happens here, I have proof. But protection for whom? Now, Playboy Enterprises has denied these allegations. No recordings have been publicly released or proven to exist in court. The company claims that any cameras were standard security equipment focused on exterior areas and entrances. But here's what we know for certain. 17 women have now made similar claims about surveillance. The consistency of their testimonies is remarkable. Same details about camera locations, same descriptions of being shown footage, same reports of threats involving recordings. They describe cameras behind mirrors in the master bedroom, cameras concealed in the grotto area, cameras in the game room where parties occurred. Wait a minute. If there was nothing to hide, why would extensive surveillance be necessary at all? Why would a private residence need dozens of cameras throughout interior spaces? Former staff member Jonathan Dante offered an explanation. He said the surveillance served two purposes: control and protection. Control because the women knew they were being watched. This modified their behavior. They self-censored. They complied. Protection because if allegations ever emerged, Hefner would have evidence of consensual activity. The recordings could be used to discredit accusers. This is sophisticated manipulation. You create evidence that can be interpreted multiple ways. Then you use that evidence as a weapon. Let's talk about what happened to the women's bodies. Former residents described intense, relentless pressure to undergo plastic surgery, specifically breast augmentation and rhinoplasty. Holly Madison revealed that Hefner would critique the women's appearances regularly. Daily commentary on their bodies, comparisons between girlfriends, direct statements about what needed to be fixed. He had a specific type that was non-negotiable: blonde hair, fair skin, large breasts, small nose, Thin figure but curvy. Light-colored eyes if possible. The women were expected to conform to this exact template. Madison herself underwent a breast augmentation during her time at the mansion. She said Hefner strongly encouraged the procedure. She said he offered to pay for it. She said he told her she would be more beautiful afterward. She was already beautiful. But she didn't match his template exactly. Other girlfriends reported identical pressure. Kendra Wilkinson discussed considering a breast augmentation because of Hefner's preferences. Multiple other women underwent procedures during their residence. Here's the real problem. Hefner offered to pay for the surgeries. This sounds generous, a wealthy man helping his girlfriends achieve their aesthetic goals. But it created another layer of debt and obligation. The women felt they owed him for the procedures. It made leaving even more difficult psychologically. He paid for my surgery. How can I just leave? Former girlfriend Isabella St. James wrote that at least 70% of the women living in the mansion during her time had received cosmetic surgery funded by Hefner. 70%. She estimated that Hefner spent $200,000 to $300,000 annually on cosmetic procedures for girlfriends. That's $290,000 to $435,000 in today's money. They all started looking the same. Blonde, enhanced, identical. Former Playmate Carla Howe described the phenomenon. We all looked like clones. Same hair, same bodies, same style. It was like he was manufacturing a specific product. But that wasn't the real reason for the mandate. The real reason was identity erasure. When everyone looks the same, individual personality disappears. The women became interchangeable, replaceable. One woman leaves, replace her with another blonde with breast implants. This is psychological control at an advanced level. You eliminate individuality, you create uniformity. You make clear that each person is replaceable. Former girlfriend Sandra Theodore discussed this dynamic in interviews. She said Hefner would explicitly compare girlfriends to each other. She has a better body than you. Her hair looks better. Why can't you look more like her? This created competition and insecurity. The women competed for approval. They modified their bodies, trying to meet impossible standards. And here's what's particularly insidious. The standard itself was a moving target. Former residents described Hefner changing his preferences. One year, he wanted bustier women. The next year, he wanted thinner women. One year, he preferred longer hair. The next year, he preferred shorter hair. The women couldn't keep up. But they kept trying, because their housing, their allowance, and their status depended on his approval. This is how you break someone psychologically. You set a standard. They meet it. You change the standard. They fail. Repeat. Now we need to discuss what former residents said about drug use at the mansion. Multiple women have alleged that quaaludes were regularly distributed at parties. Quaaludes are sedative hypnotics that were banned in the United States in 1984 because of their high potential for abuse. They cause muscle relaxation, reduced inhibitions, and impaired judgment. They were known colloquially as disco biscuits or panty droppers. Former Playmates claimed that Hefner maintained a supply of quaaludes long after the federal ban. Why? Because quaaludes lower inhibitions dramatically. They reduce resistance, they make people compliant and suggestible. They impair the ability to consent meaningfully. Former girlfriend Linda Lovelace claimed in her 1980 memoir that she was given quaaludes before parties at the mansion in the early 1970s. She described feeling unable to refuse advances while under their influence. She described experiencing events she couldn't fully remember. In 2014, Bill Cosby's deposition in a civil lawsuit revealed that he obtained quaaludes in the 1970s, specifically to give to young women he wanted to have sex with. Cosby admitted this under oath. Cosby was a regular guest at the Playboy Mansion throughout the 1970s and 1980s. He attended parties there dozens of times. Multiple Playmates have described seeing him there. The connection is clear and documented. Former Playmate P.J. Maston alleged that she was drugged at the mansion in 1972. She described accepting what she thought was aspirin for a headache. She described waking up hours later with no memory of the intervening time. She described physical evidence that sexual activity had occurred. She said this happened multiple times. She said other women reported similar experiences, At least 9 other women have made similar claims about being given substances without their knowledge or without being told what the substances actually were. Former Playmate Susie Krabacher described in her memoir being given pills at mansion parties in the late 1970s. She said she was told they were vitamins. She said they made her feel disoriented and compliant. Here's the part nobody's talking about. These weren't isolated incidents limited to one era. Multiple former staff members confirmed that a special bowl of pills was available at parties through the 1980s and into the 1990s. They said regular guests knew what the bowl contained. They said women, particularly new arrivals, were encouraged to take the pills. Former staff member Stefan Tettenbaum described this bowl in detail. He said it was placed in a specific location at parties. He said Hefner's inner circle would direct women to it. The pills allegedly included not just quaaludes, but also other sedatives and pharmaceutical drugs. Crystal Hefner also made allegations about Hugh's prescription drug use during their marriage from 2012 to 2017. She claimed he was dependent on painkillers during the final years of his life. She said he took up to 30 pills per day, including opioids and sedatives. She described his behavior as increasingly erratic. She described him pressuring her to take pills with him. She described a mansion culture where pharmaceutical use was normalized and constant. The mansion culture was built on substances that altered consciousness and lowered resistance. Think about what that means for consent. If someone is under the influence of drugs that impair judgment, can they meaningfully consent to sexual activity? The answer under law is no. This is where the testimony gets most disturbing. Former residents described a culture where group sexual encounters were normalized, expected, and allegedly coerced. Holly Madison wrote extensively about this in her 2015 memoir, Down the Rabbit Hole. She described feeling intense pressure to participate in activities with Hefner and other girlfriends. She said refusal would result in public humiliation, screaming matches, and loss of status. She described her first night at the mansion in detail. She said she was given drugs. She said she participated in activities she didn't want to participate in. She said she cried afterward. She stayed for 7 years after that first night. Why? Because she had nowhere else to go. She had given up her apartment. She had no savings. She had cut ties with friends who warned her about the mansion. This is how control works. You create a situation where leaving feels impossible. Kendra Wilkinson described similar experiences in her memoir and in interviews. She said the encounters were like a job you had to perform. She said the other women were going through the motions. She said there was no genuine desire or enjoyment. She said she participated because that was the expectation, because her room and allowance depended on it, because refusing meant being expelled. Former girlfriend Isabella St. James wrote that new arrivals were often shocked by what was expected. She said many women participated reluctantly because they feared losing their housing and financial support. She described women crying before these encounters. She described women drinking heavily to cope. She described women who would shut down emotionally and dissociate. Here's what the legal definition of consent requires. It must be freely given, without coercion, without pressure, without fear of negative consequences. When your housing depends on participation, is that consent? When your financial support is contingent on attendance, is that consent? When you're isolated from family and friends who might offer alternative support, is that consent? When you're given drugs that impair judgment, is that consent? Multiple women have said no. They've said what happened was not consensual by any meaningful definition. Several former Playmates described encounters where they felt their consent was compromised, where they participated because they felt they had no choice, where they were too intoxicated to refuse effectively, where they said no but were pressured until they stopped resisting. Stefan Tettenbaum, the former valet, confirmed in interviews that he witnessed women crying after these encounters. He said he saw women who appeared heavily intoxicated being led to Hefner's bedroom by other women or by staff. He said he saw women leave the bedroom looking disheveled and distressed. He said no one ever intervened. Former Executive Secretary Mickey Garcia described similar observations. She said she witnessed Hefner becoming angry with women who refused to participate. She said she witnessed him threatening to evict women who weren't cooperative. But here's the kicker. These activities were framed as liberation. The Playboy brand sold sexual freedom. It marketed itself as progressive and feminist. It claimed to empower women by celebrating their sexuality. This is sophisticated manipulation at its finest. You take coercive behavior. You wrap it in the language of freedom and empowerment. You make the victims believe they're choosing their oppression. You tell them they're liberated while you're actually controlling them. At least 12 women have now described this exact pattern. Same language, same framing. Same contradiction between the rhetoric of freedom and the reality of coercion. For decades, rumors circulated about underground tunnels connecting the Playboy Mansion to other properties in the neighborhood. Some dismissed this as urban legend, Hollywood mythology, conspiracy theory thinking. But former residents, staff members, and investigative journalists have confirmed that tunnels do exist beneath the property. The tunnel system was built in the 1970s, shortly after Hefner purchased the mansion. The construction was done quietly with minimal permits and limited documentation. One tunnel reportedly connected the mansion to the home of actor Kirk Douglas, whose estate bordered the Playboy property. Another allegedly led to a neighboring estate owned by entertainer James Caan. Why build tunnels between private residences? Official explanations claimed they were for privacy, so celebrities could visit the mansion without being photographed by paparazzi, so Hefner could visit neighbors without public scrutiny. This explanation sounds reasonable until you examine it closely. The Playboy Mansion grounds are extensively secured. High walls, security gates, private security staff. Celebrities could easily enter through the main gate without being photographed. Building underground tunnels is extraordinarily expensive and complex. The cost would have been at least $500,000 in 1970s dollars. That's $3.8 million in today's money. For privacy that could be achieved through existing security measures, it doesn't add up. Here's what former staff members revealed. The tunnels allowed movement that couldn't be monitored by regular mansion staff. They enabled activities that left no public record. They created a hidden infrastructure for secret gatherings. Former Playboy employee Mark Ebner investigated the tunnel system extensively for his book. He confirmed their existence through architectural records and staff testimony. He interviewed contractors who worked on the tunnels. He reported that the tunnels were approximately 8 feet tall and 6 feet wide. They were equipped with lighting and ventilation systems. They were maintained regularly. One former contractor described installing what he called entertainment spaces within the tunnel system, rooms off the main tunnels, with furniture, lighting, and audio-visual equipment. Why would tunnels need entertainment spaces? Former Playmate P.J. Maston alleged that the tunnels were used for parties involving underage girls in the 1970s. She claimed that some parties were moved underground to avoid detection by staff who weren't part of Hefner's inner circle. These are serious allegations that have never been proven in court. No criminal charges were ever filed related to the tunnels. But multiple former guests and staff members have confirmed that parties did occur in underground spaces beneath the mansion. Whether illegal activities occurred in these spaces remains alleged but unproven. But their existence adds another layer to the mansion's atmosphere of secrecy and concealment. Hidden cameras, secret tunnels, controlled access, underground gathering spaces. This is the infrastructure of concealment. This is what you build when you want activities that can't be discovered. Crystal Hefner made shocking revelations about the mansion's physical condition in multiple interviews throughout 2022 and 2023. She described severe black mold throughout the property. In the walls, behind wallpaper, in the ventilation system, in multiple bedrooms, in bathrooms, in common areas. She claimed the mold caused chronic health problems for her and other residents, respiratory issues, chronic sinus infections, skin rashes and irritation, persistent fatigue, cognitive difficulties. She said she reported the problem repeatedly to Hefner and his staff beginning in 2012. She said she begged for remediation. She said she provided medical documentation linking her health issues to mold exposure. Nothing was done for 5 years. Why? Crystal claims Hefner told her that fixing the mold would require exposing the mansion's interior to outside contractors. It would mean allowing inspectors inside. It would risk public knowledge of the property's severe decay. Control requires isolation. Isolation requires preventing outside access. But there's another reason. Remediation would have cost millions. It would have required moving out during construction. It would have disrupted the mansion's operations for months or years. Hefner was unwilling to accept that disruption, so the women lived in toxic conditions. Former staff member Jonathan Dante confirmed Crystal's allegations in his own interviews. He stated that maintenance on the mansion was minimal for decades. He said the infrastructure was falling apart, but Hefner refused major renovations or repairs. He described plumbing that backed up regularly, electrical wiring that sparked, ceiling leaks that were never properly fixed, carpet that was never replaced despite being installed in the 1970s. He said the mansion was literally rotting from the inside. Here's the real problem. The women lived in these conditions for years. Holly Madison lived in a mold-infested environment for 7 years, from 2001 to 2008. She's discussed chronic health issues that began during her time at the mansion and continue today. Kendra Wilkinson for 5 years, dozens of other women for months or years at a time. They developed chronic health issues. They were told their symptoms were psychosomatic or stress-related. They were discouraged from seeing outside doctors who might identify environmental causes. Former girlfriend Bridget Marquardt lived at the mansion from 2002 to 2009. She's discussed respiratory issues that began during her residence. She said she was repeatedly ill with infections and respiratory problems. This is another form of control. Physical environment affects mental and physical state. Chronic illness creates vulnerability. Vulnerability enables manipulation. When you're constantly sick, you have less energy to resist, less capacity to plan an exit, less ability to advocate for yourself. The mansion literally made the women sick, and the sickness made them easier to control. Now, let's look at what happened to the women after they left. Multiple former playmates and girlfriends have spoken publicly about severe depression, anxiety disorders, and PTSD following their time at the mansion. Holly Madison revealed in her memoir and in multiple interviews that she experienced suicidal thoughts while living at the mansion. She described planning to end her life. She described feeling trapped with no escape. She said she felt she couldn't leave because she had nowhere to go. She said she felt she couldn't stay because the environment was destroying her psychologically. She said leaving the mansion was like escaping a cult. She said it took years of intensive therapy to recover. She said she still experiences triggers and symptoms related to her time there. She compared the experience to Stockholm Syndrome, where captives develop psychological bonds with their captors as a survival mechanism. She lived there voluntarily. The doors weren't locked. She could have left at any time physically. But psychological control doesn't require physical chains. Former girlfriend Kendra Wilkinson has discussed her struggles with postpartum depression, anxiety, and emotional regulation issues. She's connected these issues directly to her experiences at the mansion. She said it took years of therapy to process what happened. She said the mansion taught her that her value came from her appearance and her willingness to comply. She said unlearning that message was one of the hardest things she's ever done. Former girlfriend Bridget Marquardt has discussed anxiety and trust issues stemming from her mansion years. She said she struggles with relationships. She said the mansion experience made her question her judgment and her worth. But some former residents didn't survive long enough to heal. Paige Young, Playmate of the Year in 1969, died by suicide in 1974. She was 29 years old. She left a note mentioning her time with Playboy. Friends said she struggled with severe depression after leaving the Playboy world. Dorothy Stratton, 1980 Playmate of the Year, was murdered by her estranged husband in 1980. She was 20 years old. Her story is considered one of the darkest chapters in Playboy history. She was trying to leave an abusive relationship when she was killed. Carolyn Collette, Playmate in 1963, died of a drug overdose in 1969. She was 29 years old. Yvette Vickers, Playmate in 1959, died alone in her home. Her body wasn't discovered for over a year. She had been dead since approximately 2010. She was 82, but had been estranged from family and had few friends. Elisa Bridges, Playmate of the Year in 2000, died of a drug overdose in 2002. She was 28 years old. Friends said she struggled with addiction and depression after her Playboy career. At least 8 Playmates or former girlfriends have died by suicide or drug overdose. Dozens more have struggled with addiction, eating disorders, or severe mental health issues. In the documentary Secrets of Playboy, former girlfriends described the emotional manipulation they experienced. They talked about feeling worthless, replaceable, like objects rather than people. They described a system designed to break down their self-esteem, to make them dependent, to convince them they had no value outside the mansion. Here's what research shows. Extended exposure to controlling environments causes lasting psychological damage. Victims often develop complex PTSD. They struggle with relationships. They have difficulty trusting their own judgment. They experience shame and self-blame. At least 8 former residents have sought long-term therapy specifically to address mansion-related trauma. Many others have likely sought help privately. These aren't isolated cases. This is a pattern that repeats across decades and across dozens of women. Here's a question nobody asks. How did this system operate for 46 years without intervention? The answer: enablers at every level. Let's start with Playboy Enterprises' corporate structure. The company was publicly traded from 1971 to 2011. That means it had a board of directors, shareholders, executive officers, corporate compliance requirements. Multiple executives worked directly with Hefner. They visited the mansion regularly. They attended parties. They witnessed the dynamics. Former Executive Secretary Mickey Garcia worked at Playboy for 23 years. She stated explicitly that executives knew about problematic behavior. They chose not to act because it would harm the brand and stock value. She described meetings where allegations were discussed. She said the decision was always the same: pay settlements, require NDAs, move forward, no investigation, no intervention, no protection for victims. Then there were the personal assistants and staff. At any given time, the mansion employed 15 to 25 staff members: security personnel, housekeepers, assistants, chefs, maintenance workers. They saw everything. They heard everything. They witnessed the control mechanisms in action. Former valet Stefan Tettenbaum has spoken publicly about what he witnessed. He's described women crying, women being pressured, women appearing drugged or impaired. He never reported anything. He said he feared losing his job. He said he convinced himself it wasn't his business. Multiple other staff members have given similar explanations in interviews. They saw, they knew, they stayed silent. Then there were the celebrity guests. The mansion hosted thousands of parties attended by Hollywood A-listers, musicians, athletes, and business moguls. People with resources and platforms. They witnessed the dynamics. They saw young women who appeared uncomfortable. They participated in the culture or turned a blind eye. Some celebrities have since expressed regret. Most have stayed silent. And then there were the women themselves. This is the most complicated layer of enablement. Multiple former girlfriends have described being recruited to bring new women to the mansion. Holly Madison wrote about feeling pressured to recruit friends, about feeling complicit when those friends had negative experiences. Former residents described a hierarchy where longer-term girlfriends had more status and better treatment. They had incentive to maintain the system because they benefited from their position within it. This is how abuse systems perpetuate. You create a hierarchy. You give some victims slightly more power. They become invested in maintaining the system. But here's what's critical to understand. Being an enabler doesn't erase being a victim. Many of the women who recruited others were themselves being controlled and manipulated. They were surviving in a coercive environment the only way they knew how. This doesn't excuse the behavior, but it explains it. The system had enablers at every level. Corporations protecting profits, staff protecting jobs, celebrities protecting reputations, victims protecting themselves. Everyone had a reason to stay silent, so everyone did, for 46 years. We're now deep into this story. And here's what's remarkable. Most people still think the Playboy Mansion was a paradise. Why? Let me show you exactly why this story stays hidden. Reason 1. The Playboy brand was worth billions. At its peak in the 1970s, Playboy Enterprises was valued at roughly $500 million. That's $3.2 billion in today's money. The company had casinos in Atlantic City and the Bahamas, clubs in major cities worldwide, products ranging from cologne to clothing, media properties generating hundreds of millions annually. The mansion was the crown jewel, the physical embodiment of the brand. Every photograph from the mansion generated publicity value. Protecting the brand meant protecting the mansion's image. The company spent an estimated $10 million annually on PR to maintain the fantasy. They controlled media narratives, they threatened legal action against critics, they paid settlements quietly. Former Playmate P.J. Maston claimed she was offered $100,000 to stay silent about her experiences in 1975. She said other women received similar offers ranging from $50,000 to $200,000 depending on what they knew. That's $550,000 to $1.1 million in today's money. Per woman. For silence. Reason 2. Society didn't want to believe women. The allegations against Hefner emerged slowly over decades. Women spoke out in the 1970s, in the 1980s, in the 1990s, in the 2000s. They were systematically dismissed as bitter ex-girlfriends, as attention seekers, as gold diggers, as people trying to profit from their association with Hefner. If it was so bad, why did you stay? You posed for Playboy. You knew what you were getting into. You're just angry he replaced you with younger women. This is the classic pattern of silencing victims. You attack their credibility. You question their motives. You blame them for their own victimization. You make coming forward more traumatic than staying silent. Multiple women have stated that they tried to speak out earlier but were ignored or attacked. The cultural environment wasn't ready to believe them. Reason 3. Hugh Hefner was considered a cultural icon. He appeared on magazine covers more than 1,000 times during his life. He was interviewed by every major publication. He was featured in documentaries. He received awards from civil rights organizations. He was portrayed as a champion of sexual freedom and First Amendment rights, as a progressive voice, as someone who liberated America from puritanical sexual attitudes. Taking down Hefner meant challenging a carefully constructed legacy. It meant admitting that society had celebrated someone who allegedly harmed hundreds of women. That's uncomfortable. That requires acknowledging collective failure. That means examining why we elevated him. So people avoided it. They defended him. They dismissed allegations. Even after his death, defenders argue that he was a product of his time or that his positive contributions outweigh the harm. Reason 4. The women signed non-disclosure agreements. Multiple former girlfriends have confirmed that they signed NDAs upon leaving the mansion. These agreements prohibited them from discussing their experiences. Violations could result in lawsuits seeking millions in damages. Holly Madison has stated that her NDA prevented her from speaking publicly for years. She only published her memoir in 2015 after consulting extensively with lawyers who found ways to structure her story without technically violating the agreement. She said Playboy Enterprises threatened legal action when they learned she was writing the book. They backed down only when her lawyers demonstrated that her story would likely be protected speech. How many other women remain silent because of these agreements? Former Playmate Mickey Garcia estimates at least 50 women signed NDAs after receiving settlements from Playboy Enterprises. She said the company maintained a legal fund specifically for these purposes. Reason 5. The mansion represented a male fantasy. For millions of men, the Playboy Mansion was aspirational. It represented success, pleasure, and freedom from conventional morality and family obligations. It was the ultimate bachelor pad fantasy. Beautiful women available, constant parties, no responsibilities, no consequences. Exposing the darkness behind that fantasy threatened something psychological. It meant admitting that the dream was a lie, that the glamour masked exploitation, that what looked like paradise was actually a prison. People protect their fantasies, even when those fantasies harm others. Especially when those fantasies harm others they don't personally know. Reason 6. The women were seen as complicit. This is victim blaming at a societal level. The women chose to live there. They posed for magazines. They appeared at parties smiling. They seemed happy in photographs. So society concluded they were willing participants who knew what they were getting into. This ignores how control works, how manipulation operates, how coercion can exist even in apparently voluntary situations. It ignores that photographs are staged, that smiles can be forced, that appearances don't reflect internal reality. It ignores that many women were recruited when they were extremely young. Holly Madison was 21, Kendra Wilkinson was 18. Multiple other women were 18 or 19 when they first moved in. At 18, can you recognize sophisticated psychological manipulation? Can you protect yourself from a system designed by someone with 50 years of experience controlling women? Reason 7. The full story only emerged recently. The documentary Secrets of Playboy aired in January 2022. Holly Madison's memoir was published in 2015. Hugh Hefner's revelations came in 2022. Most former residents only spoke publicly after 2017. Hugh Hefner died in September 2017. For decades, he controlled the narrative. He had resources to threaten legal action. He had a platform to discredit critics. He had PR teams to manage his image. Only after his death did women feel safe enough to speak in detail. But here's what nobody's discussing. These 7 reasons reveal exactly how powerful institutions protect themselves. They use money to buy silence. They use NDAS to enforce silence. They use cultural status to dismiss allegations. They attack credibility. They exploit social attitudes about women and sexuality. They wait for time to erase memory. The Playboy Mansion wasn't unique. The control mechanisms weren't unprecedented. This is happening right now in different industries with different powerful men using the exact same playbook. Entertainment moguls with private estates, tech executives with exclusive retreats, music producers with recording studios that double as residences, athletes with compounds, different faces, same pattern, same mechanisms of control, and the same 7 reasons keep these stories hidden until the powerful person dies or loses status. Let's talk about the real cost of the Playboy Mansion. Over 46 years, an estimated 10,000 women passed through those gates as guests, models, or residents. Not all had negative experiences. Some women have defended Hefner. Some said they enjoyed their time there. Some said they benefited from the exposure. Those experiences are valid and real. But based on public testimony, at least 15 women experienced serious harm. Multiple others have shared similar stories privately but remain anonymous. If we assume just 1% of women who lived at or regularly visited the mansion experienced exploitation, that's 100 victims. 100 women whose lives were fundamentally altered by what happened in that house. Some developed PTSD that persists decades later. Some struggled with substance abuse. Some required years of therapy. Some never fully recovered. Some didn't survive. How do you calculate the cost of that damage? Holly Madison has estimated she spent over $500,000 on therapy and recovery over 15 years. That's one person. Multiply that by 100 potential victims. That's $50 million in therapeutic costs alone. Then add the lost career opportunities. Many women spent their prime earning years at the mansion, unable to build professional skills or networks. Add the damaged relationships, the failed marriages, the inability to trust. Add the chronic health issues from mold exposure that may persist for life. Add the psychological cost of living with trauma. The total damage is incalculable. But here's what we know for certain. Hugh Hefner died in 2017 worth $43 million. That's $50 million in today's money. He built that fortune on a business model that included, according to multiple witnesses, exploitation of vulnerable women. He spent his entire life profiting from a system that allegedly harmed hundreds of women. He faced no criminal charges. He received awards and accolades. He lived in luxury until he died peacefully at age 91. The women who alleged harm, some are still in therapy, some struggle financially. Some battle chronic health conditions. Some never recovered their mental health. Holly Madison spent 7 years at the mansion. She spent 15 years recovering. Kendra Wilkinson spent 5 years at the mansion. She spent 17 years processing the experience. The perpetrator lived well. The victims are still paying the cost. So here's what this story is really about. The Playboy Mansion wasn't just a house where parties happened. It was a carefully designed system of control that operated for nearly half a century. The mechanism was elegant in its cruelty. Create an environment that looks like paradise. Isolate women from outside support, make them financially dependent, use substances to lower inhibitions, pressure them to participate in activities they don't consent to, record everything for leverage, make speaking out more costly than staying silent. This system worked because it was protected by money, by NDAs, by cultural attitudes that blamed victims, and by institutional incentives to suppress the truth. At least 15 women have now broken their silence. Their testimonies reveal a consistent pattern of manipulation, coercion, and abuse spanning decades. The mansion itself has been gutted, the grotto has been filled in, the zoo has been removed. The physical space where so much harm allegedly occurred is being systematically erased. But the testimonies remain. The documentary footage exists. The memoirs are published. The interviews are recorded. You can demolish a building. You can't erase testimony. Here's the number that should haunt everyone: 46 years. For 46 years, this system operated while thousands of people knew something was wrong. For 46 years, the truth was suppressed because speaking it threatened billions in value. For 46 years, women tried to tell their stories and were dismissed, discredited, threatened, and silenced. For 46 years, our culture celebrated a man who, according to multiple credible allegations, systematically exploited vulnerable women. The truth is finally emerging. But it took Hefner's death for women to feel safe enough to speak fully. And nobody's talking about this because it reveals how power actually works in America. The Playboy Mansion is gone, but the dynamics it represented are still operating in entertainment, in tech, in sports, in business, in politics. Different mansions, different powerful men, same control mechanisms, same pattern of exploitation, same institutional protection. The women who survived the Playboy Mansion are still recovering, still processing, still fighting to be believed fully. Their courage in speaking is what finally brought this story to light. But their voices reveal something larger. This wasn't an isolated case. This is how power operates when unchecked. This is what happens when institutions value profit over people. This is the cost of staying silent. The mansion may be destroyed, but the systems that enabled it still exist. Until we acknowledge that, until we examine how we protect powerful predators, until we believe victims when they first speak instead of decades later, the pattern will repeat. Different address, different name, same story. And nobody's talking about that because acknowledging it requires examining our collective complicity. The Playboy Mansion is finally being held to account in documentary, in memoir, in public consciousness. But how many other mansions are operating right now? How many other systems of control exist behind gates and NDAs? How many women are living the same experience today while we look away? That's the question nobody wants to answer.